So this morning, what we're doing is we're completing our little series where we've been looking at some of these nameless characters from the New and the Old Testament. And just by way of a bit of recap, here are some of the things that we've hopefully remember and hopefully have been challenged by looking at these people. Some of the things that we've looked at as we've looked at a girl back in an army general's house and people on a hill with a torch in one hand and a trumpet in the other, looking at all of these people. We've learned things like this. You can be anonymous in your world and yet still have an influence that goes way beyond your connections and your contacts. That's what that little girl did. She touched a world in ways which she could probably never have ever realized. You can feel weak and unimportant in your world, and yet God is with you, and you can be used for his plans and his purposes. As we looked at in the last couple of weeks with these two ladies that meet Jesus, your reputation and your past do not mean that God cannot transform you and cannot use you to bring others to him. Whatever your reputation might be, Jesus would not simply reject you because of your reputation. Last week, there was the woman who pours perfume on his feet, and we're told her sins are many, and yet Jesus accepts her worship, accepts what she does. And whilst we've definitely mentioned this in passing over the last few weeks, today we're going to zero in on one particular question which might be in your minds. How can all of this be true? How can our reputations be not necessarily overlooked, but not be important to Jesus? How can we be used for his purposes when we feel like nothing? How is all of this true? How can our following of Jesus become one where he is the center of all that we do? And the answer to all of those questions is found in the story of these two nameless people that are crucified with Jesus. How they respond to him and how he responds to them. Luke, who wrote the account that we're looking at today, is asking unspoken questions as we read through this. He's asking, do you get it? Do you get it? Do you see? Because when you read this passage, lots of the people who were around the cross just did not get it. They completely display their ignorance about who Jesus is and what he came to do. They do it time and time again. So if you look at verses 35 and 36, what you have there is rulers sneering at him and throwing out insults. They let their masks drop away and they show their hatred of who Jesus is. You get them shouting out things like, he saved others, he can't save himself. The soldiers, after nailing Jesus to the cross, look up at him and say, hey, if you're a king, get yourself down from there. If you really are who you claim to be, get yourself down. And then from the other accounts, we know that as people walked by, they would hurl insults at him. All of these people don't get it. And because they don't get it, Jesus says those words, Father, forgive them. They don't get what they're doing. They don't get who I am. Forgive them. But everything's written down for us so that we might get it, so that we might see exactly who Jesus is. And as we've thought about over the last few weeks, when we see who Jesus is, we should see that forgiveness and meaning and purpose and connection with God can start and they can deepen as well. And all of these things come out in how Jesus talks to two men, two very, very bad men, as they're executed. And so, if you want all of the stuff with Jesus to be true for you, or you want it to feel more true for you, here are the things that you need to do. The first one's up on the screen already. Every voice, every opinion has to go silent. You have to stop listening to what anyone else says about Jesus and all the other voices that talk about him. They all have to drop away, and you have to accept him on his terms. Now, when you read this account of the cross of Jesus, it does read like there's a load of noise. It reads like it's not a quiet place to be. As we've already said, you've got the religious leaders shouting out abuse at Jesus, telling him he's nothing to God. He's utterly unimportant. You've got the crowds who they stirred up, probably shouting similar things. I mean, these rulers had stirred them up before so much that Pilate thought there was going to be a riot, so it's not going to be a quiet place. You've got the soldiers just below Jesus gambling and drinking and probably throwing up the occasional bit of mockery at him about how powerless he is, and yet he thinks he's a king. You've got passers-by. You've got the men on the cross even throwing out insults. And as Jesus hangs there, in one last act of spite, one of these guys on the cross says to him, "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." As you look on the moment, it looks like everyone who's talking is of the same opinion, that Jesus is nothing, that he's nothing. They have differing reasons. Some of them reject him for religious reasons, some for human reasons because they don't quite get the religion of the Jewish people. Some of them do it for spiteful reasons, just one last bit of venom as they go to the grave. But the conclusion from them all is the same: Jesus is nothing. And after this day, all of them think he will be nothing forevermore. That's how crowds work. That's how crowds work today. For a variety of reasons, to most people in our world, to lots of people that you'll come across, Jesus is nothing. And some of them have religious reasons for that. Some of them have human reasons for that. Some of them have unthinking reasons. They just don't like who he is. And all of them are like this crowd around Jesus. And for a moment, let's see how this plays out in our world. So, if you were to try and boil down the essence of the gospel into a couple of sentences, you might come up with something like this. If you believe in and you follow Jesus, even though you are more sinful and more wicked than you could ever realize, you are more loved and more accepted than you ever dared to dream. That's, if you boil it down, that's what the gospel might be saying. And there will be people who are like thief number one. They won't think about it too much, and they'll just say, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, there's nothing in that, that's just a fairy story. They'll just reject it without really thinking about it. And then there's religious type of people. They will say, well, I've heard what you said about the gospel there, and I like all of that stuff about there being a definite right and wrong, and there being consequences for our actions and so on. I get that. I get that if you want to be valued by God, you have to recognize you're a sinner. But all of this, your accepted part, at no cost to yourself, I don't like that. That's too easy. That's too good to be true. Some people will say, if there is a God, I have to jump through the right hoops to prove myself to him, and so they'll reject the gospel. And then there are people as well in our world who will say, I like all of this stuff about acceptance. I like all of this stuff where it talks about how you are more loved and valued than you ever dared hope. But I don't like this bit about there being right and wrong. I don't like there being sin. I don't like people saying I can't live however I want. That's a bit much. That's a bit dark. That's a bit abusive. The crowds today are just like the crowds around the cross. The conclusions are the same. They might have different reasons, but the conclusions are the same. Jesus is nothing. For us, for you, if Christianity is going to work, if your faith is going to work, here's the thing. The crowds have to become silent. They have to become silent to you. The dominant views have to drop away. And you have to deal with Jesus on his terms and not anyone else's terms. If your faith is going to work, Jesus has got to be allowed to say who Jesus is. And as you read this event, I always think it feels like all of the voices go silent. When Jesus starts talking to the thief on the cross, it's like all of the other voices drop away. They're probably still shouting things at him, but we don't hear it anymore. I think that's deliberate. I think they have to go silent so that he can have this conversation with Jesus. For this man on the cross, it's like there's a whirlwind going on all around him, and he's at the eye of the storm, where everything goes calm, and he just listens to Christ. He knows what everyone thinks, and he decides, I'm going to press into Jesus. If you want to be a Christian, if you want to be a follower of Christ, you have to learn what he learns. The opinion of others and what friends and family and society thinks has to become a very distant second. If we were to think back to last week, the woman with the perfume at the dinner party, she had to get to a point where she said, "This is the most important man in the world to me. And I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm going to go and I'm going to honor him the way I want to honor him." She had to know she would walk in and get all kinds of dirty looks. She would get talked about. But she had to say, "I don't care what anyone else thinks." Now, I'd like you to just look at your own life for a minute. If you're still investigating Jesus, that's great. But if one of your reasons for rejecting him at the moment is this, "I'm worried what other people think," it's never going to work for you, because you have to get to a point where you take him on his terms. You have to see him as he says he is. And if you've been a Christian for years and you worry what other people think, your faith is not going to work as well as you want it to. And we know this. For a moment, I want you to imagine you're a teenager again. Imagine you're a teenager. And there's a friendship that you have with someone who you want that to become more than a friendship. It's one of those kind of moments. And you think they might too as well. You think this could become something. If in that moment, what holds you back is what your friends think, more often than not, if you were in that position, those things never developed into anything because you were too concerned with what others think. Now, hopefully, those of us who are married can look back and think, "I got over that and things are okay now. Maybe I missed a nightmare to find the one I was supposed to be with." And every man in the room who's married now, you should be nodding and saying, "Amen." That's exactly what happened. But if you've got a fear of the opinion of others and it never goes away, you might miss out on finding out who Jesus is. You might miss out on finding out whether his words about how he can quench the thirst of your soul mean anything or not. First thing you have to learn is, to make being a Christian work, the crowd has got to fall silent. Second thing, you have to become convinced about how knowing Jesus is the most important thing in your life. He has to be absolutely first. He has to be the thing your entire life and your entire significance is built upon. Now let's go back to criminal number one. Let's look at what he says. He shouts out these words, "If you are the Christ, save yourselves and us." He's kind of saying to Jesus, I would be really quite pleased if you would change my circumstances. If you would do that, I'd follow you. If you would prove that you're the Christ and you would save me from this moment where I'm on a cross, hey, I'd love it. He's kind of like, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. He wants to get off of the cross. It looks okay, but what's he actually doing? What's he actually doing in this request? If you are the Messiah, save yourself and us. What's he doing? Well, to illustrate what I think he's doing here, we're going to talk about a Garth Brooks song. So I've mentioned before I'm a country and western fan. Let's do it publicly again. There's a Garth Brooks song called Unanswered Prayers, and it's a proper country song. It's one about where he meets his old high school girlfriend at a football match with his wife. Now, that's an awkward setting for a song, but that's what country songs do. And the lyrics go something like this. She was the one that I'd wanted for all time. And each night I kept praying that God would make her mine. And if he'd only grant me this wish I wished back then, I'd never ask for anything again. In that prayer, in that song, what is God to that person? God's a genie. God's a genie. And the thing about a genie is this. You rub the lamp and he pops out and he gives you 3 wishes. He asks you, what do you want? And once you've got the wishes, you don't need the genie anymore. You don't need him anymore. Once he's done his thing, it's get back in the lamp. Your purpose has completely and utterly been served. If he'd only grant me this wish I wished back then, I'd never ask for anything again. Once I have the thing that I think makes my life worth living, I don't need you anymore. Don't need you. If your dealing with God is anything like that song, if your prayers have ever gone, hey, God, if you sort this problem out for me, I'll follow you. Or if you make my life better, I'll believe in you. Or if my children can have everything they want, I'll follow you. I'll pray every day. I'll give more. What's on the other side of that if is what you really live for. In that song, it's not interested in God. It's interested in the girl. God is an absolute secondary to him. That is what one of the criminals on the cross is doing. If you save me, I'll follow you. Now, what does the second one say? What does the second one say? He says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Let's think about that for a moment. Because is that it? Is that what he wants? He's hanging on a cross. He's naked. He's got blood seeping out of wounds in his hands and his feet. He knows that he's slowly and horrifically going to die of suffocation. He knows at some point in the next few hours, the soldiers are going to come along and they're going to break his legs so that he dies horrifically. And he wants the guy next to him to remember him. That's an odd request, isn't it? It's an odd request. This man is convinced of something. He's convinced that Jesus is not just a genie. He's not just a means to an end. He's not just someone who can take him off the cross. He's someone who can change everything. He's saying to Jesus, you are more important to me than me getting out of this. You are more important to me than me getting off the cross. If you remember me when you come into your kingdom, whatever else happens today, I'll be okay. That's what he's saying. Getting off the cross is less important to him than Jesus remembering him. That's a statement and a half. He's realized that Jesus is no ordinary man. Somehow, through all of the teaching and miracles of Jesus, he's realized that Jesus is going to be king beyond this moment, that death is not the end for him. And he's saying to him, I want to be there with you when you are in your kingdom. That's more important to me than getting off the cross right now. Now, that's a challenge, isn't it? That's a real challenge. I don't think I can think of worse circumstances than hanging on a cross like that. And he is saying to Jesus, I don't care if my circumstances don't change, as long as you remember me. I don't care if my circumstances don't change, as long as you remember me. Could you say that about Jesus? Could you say that? Could you say, my career can tank as long as Jesus remembers me? My health can be problematic from this day forward until the day I die, as long as Jesus remembers me. I could be single forever, as long as Jesus remembers me. I could, hey, you insert the blank, as long as Jesus remembers me. That's something to learn. That's something to think about from this passage. Jesus is first in his life at this point. And then there's a third thing for us to learn to make this work. Like this criminal, you have to be able to say two things that make no sense outside of grace. You have to get what grace is all about. If you look at verse 41, he says there to the other criminal, we deserve what we're getting. We deserve it. We are justly punished for what's happening to us. We totally deserve to die. So as he looks at his life, he's not saying, oh, I've suffered an incredible injustice here. He looks at his life and he says, because of what I've done, I deserve to be on this cross. I deserve to be here. Now, we can only speculate as to what that might be, but as he looks at his life, he says, hey, death's what I deserve. And then you have right next to that, verse 42. Jesus, remember me. And when you establish your kingdom, when you come as God's king, remember me. Now, those two things next to each other outside of grace make absolutely no sense. You could understand someone saying, I deserve to be on the cross, so punish me. You can understand saying someone, I don't deserve this, so vindicate me. But to say, I deserve death for what I've done, Jesus, remember me, doesn't make a ton of sense unless you get what grace is about. I deserve death, take me to heaven. That's what he's saying. That's an incredible couple of statements to put next to each other. That, humanly, makes absolutely no sense. It makes no sense to us because we view it like this. Going to give you another... I'm into Disney films today. So if you've seen the Pixar film Coco, this is how we tend to view how things work. That film follows people in a kind of afterlife world, and their existence in that afterlife world totally depends on whether people in the world of the living remember them. The whole film has within it this song which is all the way through, Remember Me. And the story is about someone called Ernesto, part of it is about this guy, Ernesto de la Cruz. Everyone thinks he's written this song, Remember Me. This guy over here is called Hector, and his family are forgetting him. All that's left is his daughter with dementia, who is slowly forgetting him. The family think he abandoned them. When she dies, he will cease to exist because everyone will have forgotten him. Whereas the truth of the story is, he's completely innocent, and this guy murdered him. It's a Disney film with a murder in it. He murdered him. And the way the story goes on is, as it becomes clear that this is actually the bad guy and this is the good guy, something happens in the world of the living. Everyone has loved this person. He's world famous in it. Once they find out he's a murderer, the thing they put on his tomb are these words, a big sign that says, forget you, forget you. Because he has done something so bad, they think he should be forgotten and he should cease to exist. That's the way that film works. That film says, and the world we live in thinks this, you're guilty, forget you. You're guilty, forget you. You're innocent, we'll remember you. That's our world. Thief on the cross, I deserve to be forgotten, remember me. I deserve to be forgotten, remember me. That's us. That's us. We deserve to be forgotten, and yet Jesus will remember us. How is that possible? How is that possible? Well, let's go back to the passage. Go back to, I think it's verse 34. Verse 34. No, verse 44. Verse 44. What do we read there? It's dark. It's noon. It's dark for 3 hours. There's this moment in the crucifixion where everything goes dark. And that's not just a mood moment. That's not just a bit of cinematic description to make it all seem a bit more tense. This is really, really significant. When it goes dark, some things from the Old Testament should start to come into our minds. So when the Old Testament talks about darkness in the middle of the day, it's not about God being absent. It's not about God not being present. It's about God being very, very present, and in that presence, judging sin and judging evil. That's what when it goes dark, that's what happens in the Old Testament. So in the book of Joel, it says this, the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming and dreadful day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. It's a moment where darkness says, hey, God's here, and it's not a good day. It's not a good day. In Amos 8, it's a passage where God is talking about how he's going to judge his people. And it says in verse 9 of Amos 8, in that day I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your religious festivals into mourning and your singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. It's not a positive moment. When it goes dark in the middle of the day in the Bible, God's present and he's dealing with sin. So why is this happening at the cross? It's happening because on that middle cross there, Jesus is saying, I'm innocent, punish me in his place. I'm innocent, so punish me. Jesus is saying about us, I choose to stay here so they can go free. Remember them because I'm being forgotten. And that's why Jesus can turn to him and say, I tell you the truth, today you'll be with me in paradise. As this guy hangs on a cross, that's what he hears. You'll be with me because it's like you're with me now. In the book of Colossians, it talks about our connection to Jesus. And it says that through faith, we died with him. We died with him. That there's a connection where it says you died with Christ and your life is now hidden with him in God. Jesus effectively says on the cross to his Father, punish me for them. Punish them through me. There's a connection. What happens to him happens to us. View me as him and view him as me. And when we place our faith in Jesus, when he becomes the most significant person in our life, everything that's true of Jesus becomes true of us. Everything that's true of him becomes true of us. So at Jesus' baptism, God breaks through and he says, this is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. If you trust in Jesus, God says that about you because of what he's done. The night before the cross, and we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, we kind of touched on it, Jesus says these words, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory, because you loved me before the creation of the world. He wants people to be with him and to see his glory, but then more than that, it says, then the world will know that you loved me and sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. What that's saying to us is this. God the Father loves you as much as he loves God the Son. That's how much God loves you. That's an incredible thought. We deserve to be forgotten, but we can have the audacity to ask, remember me, because of what Jesus has done. We have a God that is so good and so loving and so kind that a dying man on a cross who could do literally nothing can say, I deserve to be here. I deserve this. Remember me, God. Remember me. And he's welcomed. He's welcomed into the very presence of God. He doesn't squeak in. He doesn't get in by the skin of his teeth. He gets in because Jesus has paid his debt. We're going to be able to meet that nameless character. That's quite an exciting thought, isn't it? We had to meet some of these guys that and ladies that we've been looking at in the last few weeks. But better than that, you'll be able to meet the guy on the cross who said, you'll be with me in paradise. That's even better. That's even better. Don't just settle for the guys who knew Jesus. We can go right into his presence. And if this is all true, then everything that we've looked at over the last few weeks can be true about you. That nameless girl in Naaman's house who touched the lives of 2 kings, your life could do that. You can be used for God's plans and his purposes because, hey, Jesus has died for you. Your reputation is of no barrier to worshipping him. You can be someone who worships him in a heartfelt way and welcomed into his presence. Your Christian walk can be reinvigorated today, or it can start today if you'll simply do what the thief on the cross did. Let the crowds go silent. Let the opinion of others just drop away. Let Jesus not just be a means to an end, but the very center of your life. And hold on to that truth, that you can say, I deserve this. I deserve to be forgotten, so remember me, Jesus. It's all there as a gift, just to be taken by faith. Criminal number 1, his darkness remained on him forever. That's the horrible truth for him. His darkness remained on him forever, and his future is worse than being forgotten. It's worse than being forgotten. Jesus today would say to us, hey, reach out to me by faith and you can be with me in paradise. Let's pray. Father, we would ask this morning that as we gather together, as we meet here, that your Spirit would speak to us. If we're someone who listens to the opinion of others more than we should, help us to let them drop away and just to focus in on what Jesus says. Help us to do that. If we're someone who struggles to see Jesus as nothing more than a means to an end, may your Spirit reveal to us the things that we live for or that push Jesus out of his rightful place, and help us to see actually they can't satisfy us the way that he does. And help us, Lord, to hold those two things together. We are totally guilty, totally deserving of punishment, and yet you want to remember us. You want to take our place. Help us to know that those two things go together in a way that perhaps we can't understand and that only makes sense because of the cross. And Lord, if we do know all this already, help us to know it more. Help us to live in what Christ has done. We are guilty, and yet he would remember us. Lord, be with us. Help us, guide us. And if we need to take the step of believing for the very first time, give us the courage and the confidence and the ability to do it. And we ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.